of acts because there is a huge buildup, over 100,000 troops on the Russian side, and the overwhelming firepower, if it continues, will lead to real devastation across the country. It already has. So let's keep supporting these very brave people who are fighting for their own freedom and for ours, and let's try to be as supportive as we possibly can by talking about the issue and by supporting it materially. Well, let's get on with the show, and it's going to be a great discussion today. Really appreciate everyone's participation, and thank you so much. Welcome to the Nonprofit Report, your update on nonprofit organizations, issues, and leaders. I'm your host, Mark Oppenheim. Today, we're discussing the important work of natural history museums and science museums with special guests, Claudio Gomez, Executive Director of the McClung Museum of Natural History and Culture at the University of Tennessee, Amy Harris, Director of the University of Michigan Museum of Natural History, and Halsey Spruance, Executive Director of the Delaware Museum of Nature and Science. And a reminder to Zoom attendees that we will take 3 snap polls during the show, and we'll announce results. And questions submitted through the Q&A function at the bottom of your screen will be included in our discussion. So thank you all for joining us. I'm so grateful, and I'm so excited about this topic. And Claudio, I'm going to go to you first. So thank you for turning on your microphone. Natural history museums enjoy overwhelming popularity in this country and worldwide. Science museums are so exciting. And in the US alone, there are hundreds of such museums, and attendance is great. I mean, people would love to have this type of attendance at their institutions, and it's people of all ages. Now, keeping specimen collections is important, it's expensive, and then we have the curators, the staffs, the buildings. We're talking about a very sophisticated operation, and natural history and science museums are so intrinsic to education in this country. And it also informs things like our policy, right? That education informs what we actually decide and do. And so, Claudio, let's start with you. Why should Tennesseans care about your work? Why is your institution so important within your state, within your region, and within our country?
Well, that's a good question, and thank you for having me here today. Hello to everyone listening or watching this presentation. Well, the first reason I would say is that the Tennessee River itself is a hotspot of biodiversity, not just in the US, but in the world. So for us at the McClung, getting to have the opportunity to explain or present that biodiversity to our visitors and communities around us, I think it's very important. So that's one of the key projects that we're working on in the not too distant future. So Tennesseans should worry about whatever is happening around them, because whatever happens in Tennessee probably is also happening in other places of the world. And natural history museums are trying to present those issues and those challenges all around the world.
So part of your point is that we're trying to create a sustainable world, a world that we can all enjoy and our children can enjoy, and our grandchildren can enjoy for years. And your research is not only unfolding the history and the science embedded in the environs of Tennessee, but it also allows us to make really smart decisions going into the future. Amy, talk a little bit about your work at the University of Michigan.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me here. The University of Michigan has one of the largest natural history collections in the world, with about 20 million specimens. But we have an unusual structure where we have research museums that are not open to the public, but the museum I direct is open to the public. So we're the portal by which the public can access some of the research and things that go on in the collections. One of the ways we do that is by offering a science communication training program. So at our museum, the public has an opportunity to talk directly with scientists about their research, to see the collections, and to learn about the importance of them. So it's a little bit different structure than some other museums, but our focus is on communicating research and giving the public access to the research.
So that's really interesting. So you become the intermediary that makes the, and excuse me for saying this, the sciencey stuff accessible to somebody like me.
Absolutely. We personalize science by giving people an opportunity to meet scientists, to ask them questions, to look at things from their work, to touch things, to ask the questions that they have.
And what is the mix of ages that are exposed to that knowledge within your institution? Do you have a audience that skews younger or older? What is that?
Well, I've had this discussion with consultants before who wanted me to choose one audience to focus on, and I've resisted that at every step. We really do serve everyone. College students are important because we're a university, but we have families with small children who come to our scientist spotlight events, as well as adults who kind of wish the kids would stop asking questions so they can talk to the science.
And Halsey, you represent a university museum. You just had a name change to the Delaware Museum of Nature and Science. Talk a little bit about that, and also about the logic behind your $11 million expansion as well.
Well, thank you for having me on, Mark. Much appreciated. Great to be here. Unlike Claudio and Amy, the Museum of Nature and Science here in Delaware is not affiliated with the university. So we're somewhat different. And we are just finishing up an $11 million capital campaign to reinvent ourselves, put ourselves in the 21st century with new practices on how visitors are interacting, which is great. I'd like to get to this, the collections part. The collections obviously are a record of biodiversity throughout history and time and across the globe. An important part of our focus here at the Delaware Museum of Nature and Science is that those collections and the work that's being done there, we're not encyclopedic in our collections. We don't go for everything. We really specialize in mollusks and birds. That's really where we go for. But that information informs what goes on to our general public. So yes, we are specializing in mollusks and birds. But those curators, those collections managers are the ones that help us validate what our messages are going on downstairs. So it's not just a bunch of Bachelor of Arts graduates with education degrees. We actually have some hard science that informs what we're doing downstairs. That's an important part.
You know, we did the search for the Nature Conservancy's executive director at Pennsylvania and Delaware. And the science-based conservation work really does take knowledge that has been developed over the millennia and uses that to inform their current research. So the idea of having a catalog of knowledge accessible through the university is so important. And Claudio, you were saying something before the show started about your collection that also connects to Halsey's strength in mollusks in particular. Could you talk a little bit about that and how this is so important to have in different parts of the country, these different collections that can be used by scientists as a reference?
Yeah, well, as Halsey was saying, biological collections in museums are systematic, and they're in that sense, museums are true libraries of biodiversity. So it's just like libraries, you would like to have as many as you can and distribute it for access for different types of research. Of course, collecting what is closer to them. In our case, like in the picture in my background, fresh water mussels from the Tennessee River and other tributaries and rivers here in East Tennessee. So understanding that, for example, the big hydraulic works from the 30s, how that changed the environment, how that changed the development or sometimes the survival of certain species. That's how you can understand that over the years in these libraries. And taxonomers, by either biologists or other kind of professionals will give you that information, and probably now we can make better decisions than in the 30s, hopefully, and in the sense of keeping our biodiversity, because we depend, as a human species, we depend of our biodiversity or biodiverse environment. The more specialized you get, the more open you are to dramatic changes. So I think museums can tell those stories. They actually tell the stories, and we should keep focusing on issues that are very, I would say, sometimes challenged, but we have to rely also on, and especially here in the US, how museums are trusted by the general public to tell these stories. Science needs to be out, and museums, I think, are the excellent vehicles to tell those stories.
So important. You know, your point about the effect of dams in the Tennessee Valley Authority in order to create electrification throughout that region. On the wildlife and the ecosystems. We were just talking with the Deschutes Land Trust, and there it's about the electric dams and the salmon fisheries. Amy, how do you explain these types of downstream impacts on our food chain, or on our environment, on our plant life? How do you explain that through your exhibitions so that people understand the connections between esoteric knowledge that might just be embedded in layers of clay and what is going on today when I establish a business, for example, for generating electricity for cars, right, or storing electricity in batteries, which requires chemicals, which requires extractive minerals. Right? How do we balance our interests and use this knowledge to create better decisions for us all?
Well, a couple of responses come to mind. One is that we have a long-standing, but currently mothballed because of COVID Science Cafe series. And these are the kind of topics that are really great as discussion points, where we would invite a combination of faculty and community members to present information on these really current issues, and then invite discussion with the audience, with experts, so they can get their questions answered. But we also reflect these kinds of current topics in our exhibits. We have some special exhibits that change frequently that are called research stations, and they are quick changing current research of our faculty that address a lot of questions such as the ones you just raised.
You know, we can do a little bit of a better job, perhaps a much better job, of making these in-person experiences engaging. We just finished a poll in which we asked, you know, where do people get their information? And a third of them said museums. We've done this poll over and over and over again over the years. And that 1/3 kind of thing constantly comes up. Is there a way that we can make, in the way that Amy was describing, Halsey, is there a way that we can make our in-person experiences more interactive, more exciting? Can we reshape those experiences so that people just can't wait to get to the museum and are thinking about you every single day?
That's the goal every day. No, along the lines of what Amy's talking about, we tend to benchmark in this industry in a lot of ways. And there's a lot of free-flowing information that goes back and forth, especially when you have geography distances between Michigan and Tennessee. We too also are doing exactly what Amy's talking about. Rather than research stations, we're calling it research headquarters, where we actually have not only the research that's going on within this museum, but the other things that are going on at Delaware State University, University of Delaware, Academy of Natural Sciences, where we're highlighting that information, highlighting that research, highlighting those programs within our galleries. And there's a couple of, it's a little more higher brow than the normal, children experience coming through, which is good, which is a good thing. And what we're looking at is to, one, show off the great information that's being accumulated, but also to incite some careers in underserved audiences, and particularly in young women, which is an underrepresented workforce in the scientific community. So that's where we're looking to kind of have almost an economic benefit for the rest of the world. I mean, we're not, I'm humble, but it is a part of our nonprofit mission to get that going, to spread the word.
That's really interesting. So you're drawing the connection between what you're doing and workforce development and people entering the STEM professions. And frankly, if you look at STEM professions, I just did a show on this, 89% of people in STEM are men, which means that we're not using all of our resources, which just, just from an American economic perspective, is just unbelievably stupid. We need to repair that, don't we?
Yeah, without
Absolutely.
question. We take it one step further too, in addition, and that is we also take those research stories and we actually put them into interactive activities within the museum, the new museum, where we're tying that together. So, for instance, you may have a researcher at the University of Delaware. He'll have a research story going on in the research headquarters, but also putting an activity in the Discovery Gallery where he's talking about his coastal erosion work that he's doing along the Delaware Bay.
How often do you think about fun? The whole idea of edutainment, right, which was a dirty word, but the actual, you know, which in some museum environments is viewed as kind of a pejorative, the fun word, right? Fun experiences. Amy, Claudio, you want to jump in on this?
I don't think that you should exclude the word fun of your dictionary or when you're setting goals for yourselves and your team. I mean, it's I think that you can measure the success of your work by the laughter that you hear in the galleries, and I think that's a good benchmark. Science is fun. If you're not doing it in the funny way, I think you should be worried. That doesn't mean, and that's one of the things that sometimes you hear scientists saying, oh, we need to dumb down things. Right. And I'm always saying you need to smart up. Right. It's the other way around. It's not that you are here and the other, visitors are, way down there. No. Visitors are usually smarter in their own ways, and they will, find out very quickly if you're not being, precise, or you're not being accurate, or you're not using some of the resources that they're expecting to see in your gallery. So I think fun should be part of the work.
I'll point out that, I think increasingly we're seeing requirements in National Science Foundation grants that require not just the research to be done for a project, but also incorporating a public component to it. So a lot of the researchers that we have around here that like to be in their silos doing their research are having to actually come down and do something with it. And initially that was in the form of poster sessions and stuff. And that's changing. I think we're seeing a lot of researchers that really understand the value of the public dissemination of the work that they're doing.
I love the laughter metric, right, Amy? I mean, isn't that, you were just laughing or smiling along and nodding. It's the laughter metric, isn't it? That noisiness in the galleries that you're looking for.
Yeah, I love that idea of a laughter metric. For me, it had been, hearing people say, wow, oh, I didn't know that. I hear that every day when I walk through the galleries. But I was also chuckling because, how can you not love working in a place where people come to see the dinosaurs? Yeah. And the awestruck children who know more than the staff do about the dinosaurs. That's how I kind of think of that as how we bring people in. They come to see the dinosaurs, but once they're here, then they stumble on all the other amazing things that we have and the fun things that we have. That we've put a lot of effort into making the experience at our museum fun.
One of the things that I've noticed in the study of paleontology, so dinosaurs, is the shift from when I was really young. When I was really young, it was the fascination with the big boned animals. But as we've seen studies on what happened as climate change and the demise of the dinosaurs, we're going to studies of much smaller animals and seeing which animals survived and how, and what the strategies were that allowed that survival to take place, because we're seeing a very rapid climate shift. We're seeing die-offs of species at an amazing rate. And we're using that sort of past reference as a reference for what we're doing in the future. Could you talk a little bit about how you see the use of science that you expose to inform the behaviors in your various communities, and how that connects to things that are happening, for example, in public schools and policy debates in government? Halsey, do you have any examples that you'd like to highlight in how the knowledge that you have in your institution are affecting others?
Well, yeah, I think part of this migration from 20th century learning to 21st is certainly we still rely on that lecture type thing, and the kids knowing more of the dinosaur names than most lay people know. But where we're taking it one step further is the interdisciplinary science, where you can actually, for instance, look at fossil records to start to figure out, were there feathers on this animal, were there colors within those feathers, and that becomes really interesting in terms of a dialogue, and that's science based. When it comes down to doing policy or affecting policy, especially as it goes to climate change, we are actually raising those topics within the museum, which wasn't there before. There wasn't basically a place for that discussion, and certainly we are science-based, but having those discussions is an important part where we see ourselves as a forum for having those discussions.
So you're internally challenging the traditional categorization of different segments, paleontology or maybe the physical sciences, mineral sciences, and so on and so forth. And you're looking at cross-cutting topics like global warming and taking elements from each of these disciplines to create a separate category that allows for exploration across disciplines, engaging different scientists and different collections.
Without question. That is, you nailed it.
And even science and art, sorry.
Go ahead, Claudio.
No, even science and art, because when you see those drawings of extinct animals, it's part science and it's also part imagination. And those that are bringing those animals to life and bidimensional representation are artists, even though they may be trained in science. What you're seeing, sometimes in the first page of Nature, or whatever, these are drawings that are quite pieces of art, and are people collecting natural history illustrations since centuries, since the first illustrators took that important role in presenting science findings.
That's really interesting. If you look at the Audubon's drawings of birds, right? Sometimes those drawings, because they highlight key features and not all the information that you'd have in a photo, it becomes easier to navigate the actual features and distinguishing aspects of different species than using a photograph. Amy, do you have a particular favorite example of how your work actually connects to things that are being discussed right now and actions that are being taken in Michigan?
Yeah, we reorganized our fossil hall from, it was previously organized around groups of animals, but now it's a walk through time. That's not an unusual organization. But we really have called out the sequence of mass extinctions over time. We have pillars that are tall and they're burned to show the extent of extinction of species at each of those milestones along the way. And so by the time you get to today and you look at the 6th extinction pillar, you really have a sense that, wow, 95% of species could go extinct. Life will rebound, but we might not be here. In this particular instance, we can make a difference because human actions are having an impact on the rate of extinction now. We can change that and we can save ourselves.
Well, that's a really interesting point. And what you're saying is that in terms of the mass side, we have always affected environments on a micro level. I mean, look at the deforestation of Greece and Scotland and how that affected the environment. But that's on a more of a local and micro level. But this mass extinction that is globe-wide, this is the first mass extinction that is being driven by us. And it's our behaviors. So changing those behaviors could perhaps alter the trajectory, right?
Right, absolutely. It's a very powerful message.
So I'd like to talk a little bit about an interesting topic. Very often in these discussions, I'm dealing with 3 guests who are all white guys, right? In this case, we've got a group of people from different parts of the country, different ethnicities, genders, and so on. And I'd like to talk a little bit about how representation affects or doesn't affect this. We've so often thought that science is kind of neutral, And then we see a film like Hidden Figures, where it becomes so very clear that without those women who were groundbreaking mathematicians, we would have ended up with disasters in space. Let's talk a little bit about how this whole topic has affected you, affected what you actually display, affected your boards, affected your staffs. Halsey, how has this issue of representation, as it's unfolded over the last, in particular the last years, affected your operations at the Delaware Museum of Nature and Science?
As you may know, Wilmington, Delaware is a corporate headquarters and a corporate place. So there's a lot of lawyers and there's a lot of investment bankers, and they tend to be all white. And they're great people to have on the board because they give well, which is nice. But in this, and that's fine, but in this world of generating partnerships, what we've been focused on is looking at a broader representation of the community and beyond the banking and law firms. And how we've gone about that is to get into the universities, get into these leadership programs that are here in Wilmington, Delaware. And what we're finding is that there's a whole bunch of stuff, that a whole bunch of people out there that have a lot to bring to this museum. And oh, by the way, they also have a broader representation of the community in terms of their skin color and their gender and stuff like that. It's been remarkable. So I'll use an example. We're working with the University of Delaware on some stuff, and we had the dean of the College of Earth, Ocean, and Environment there, and she happened to be not only a PhD but a woman, and she's not just African American; she's actually African. So that was a great kind of a way to bring in a bunch of things for our diversification and to represent the community. That's the real part, is to represent the community.
That's really interesting. And you're bringing in the international perspective as well. Also very important. Somebody who has not grown up in this country and might see the entire natural history sphere and the science sphere in a distinctive way. You're also bringing up another point, which is that just like science, there's often this view that wealth is neutral, but it isn't. If wealth already skews to particular ethnic groups, then wealth is not neutral. So if you build boards based on the ability to give, then you're automatically skewing boards. So you're basically taking a new view from top to bottom, aren't you, Halsey, in terms of governance, in terms of board composition, in terms of your staff composition, without throwing out what has been done before. You're rethinking what you're going to be doing in the future.
Oh, without question, yeah. And then beyond this, the board part. So traditional ways of hiring or recruiting employees. We used to go to the traditional outlets, to the newspaper and whatnot. And now we're reaching out to these. There's several HBCUs in this area, historically Black colleges and universities. One of which is Del State, the other one is Lincoln Universities, and there's a couple more. So we're actually, and the idea of that, you were saying something about the women are not represented in science, and so we're missing out on those people. So the same idea, if we get into those HBCUs, we can actually tap into, mine an audience for bringing into the museum culture, the museum profession, that will have a broader impact. Big time.
Claudio, how do you see this? We're coming to the end of our time, so we're going to give you a last word and Amy a last word. How do you see this really important topic?
Well, it wasn't that long ago we had a town hall meeting with the chancellor of the University of Tennessee, Knoxville, Dr. Dundee Plowman, and she was challenging us, all of us, senior administrators at the university, to kind of mirror the diversity around us, and on a state that you can say, hey, things seem to be kind of skewing one side, we need to bring those groups and communities around us. And that's why I also, like Halsey, I use communities in plural. I think we need to bring that into our everyday language, so we can be aware that it's not just one group, but several groups that we're trying to serve. So I'm very proud that to be in a university, or being a museum university with a leadership that is pushing us to do that.
You know, what's also interesting, and you bring in this idea of diversity within the Latin Hispanic community. There's this incredible diversity within what we call the Asian community, incredible diversity, right? So no one is just one thing. This idea of people bouncing into each other, challenging assumptions, looking at an anthropological exhibit and saying, wait a second, look at it from a different perspective. Maybe there's knowledge in here that you have never discovered simply because you're not looking at it from my perspective, right?
Absolutely. And here we have what you could call Hispanic communities, where their second language is Spanish. So for Spanish would be lingua franca for people, coming from different countries in Central or South America. So so it's like a third layer, like English, Spanish, and their own, language. So it's those things that you need to observe, acknowledge, and then act on purpose, because otherwise you will be creating even more, differences, or creating more barriers for accessing it's knowledge that belongs to everyone, and I really mean it, to everyone.
And Amy, we've talked mostly about boards and staffs and internal scientists and so on and so forth, but you also have this diverse audience coming in, and you're trying to connect them where they live, where they feel, where their emotions lie, where their interests lie. Connecting to audience is so complicated because everybody's an individual, and then there are clusters of interests and clusters of ages. How do you change your staff, your approach to deal with the rising consciousness that we're having, that we could do better?
Yeah, well, I think our superpower as a university museum is our students. We have a pretty diverse set of student employees. We've had as many as 80 at a time. It's a long-standing student docent program since the 50s. And we train these students, we pay them, it's a job for them. And they look like our audience. And that's part of our goal, is to make sure that when our audience comes in the door, there's a good chance that they'll see somebody who looks like them, who's enthusiastic, who's really excited to share their knowledge with them.
Well, this has been just terrific. I'm actually going to give one of our attendees the last word, because this is going to be another show. Thomas Broadhead asked, I know many museums worldwide are in the process of repatriating indigenous objects. Look at what's happening with the Benin bronzes, for example, and what has happened and still is work to be done with native art and artifacts here in this country. And he says, Thomas says, how can the Native American Graves Protection and Repatriation Act be used by museums to better share with visitors the importance of cultural heritage? Thomas, we're going to make a show on this. It's just a great question, and we're going to deal with it. But these are the kinds of issues that you're all dealing with, right? As you're trying to keep faith with knowledge, but also respect the different perspectives that we're just becoming educated in through people like Thomas. So thank you all. It's just been great. Claudio Gomez, Executive Director of the McClung Museum of Natural History and Culture at the University of Tennessee, Amy Harris, Director of the University of Michigan Museum of Natural History, and Halsey Spruance, Executive Director of the Delaware Museum of Nature and Science. We are in your debt. Please thank your staffs, your boards, your supporters, and your communities for helping us to understand your world just a little bit better.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you for having us. It was really fun.
Yeah.